So thank you, Steve, for the invitation to come to your conference this year. I've learned a lot so far. It's a great event. I work in the Department of Environmental Services in the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau. My name's Rigrod, and I'm not the private well person, but we have kind of a team of people that work on private wells because our state doesn't actually allocate funding specifically to address these types of issues, education outreach to private well to private well users. So I'm here this morning to talk about a project that I managed with a group of people that was funded by CDC in 2013. It was a two-part grant that addressed two different things. One is the project I'm going to talk about, and the other was a series of actions that had to do with developing some statistical data and background information about risk and exposure to arsenic in groundwater in New Hampshire, through conducting a statewide survey, doing some epidemiological review and risk assessment. That formed kind of a narrative for us to better articulate the exposure risks to arsenic in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire, if you didn't know, was referred to as the arsenic state based on our traditional industries for arsenic mining. So we do have arsenic as an issue, but we have other contaminants that are of concern as well. So I'm talking about a web app for half an hour. I had to be a little creative, but I think I can do this and keep you guys from not falling asleep. So this is a paper published in 2016 by a group, the USGS and the Giselle School of Medicine and some other partners, and it reinforces if you look at the red in the New England, northern New Hampshire, northern New England area, it's showing higher bladder cancer rates, and the study essentially reinforces what's been known for decades, which is seems to be this correlation with both men and women for higher bladder cancer rates associated with private well use. And so arsenic, while not the only issue, is clearly a driver for our program as an environmental agency who also has a mission that deals with public health protection. So the tool does a couple of things, and as Susan mentioned earlier, a number of people have problems understanding what their lab results mean. So we have a state lab in Concord, and they do a pretty good job at explaining what the results mean, but people do not converse with terms like MCLs, SMCLs, limits, reporting limits, detection limits, and a lot of these terms that are on the reports. They don't understand the units, and so that, as the last speaker said, there's a tendency to sort of get the report and not really know what to do with it. And some of the survey data that was done by Dartmouth, Toxic Metals Superfund Research Program at Dartmouth, reinforces that understanding that people are not really getting it. So this tool takes a piece of the tool and tries to summarize in graphical form, and I'll show you in a bit what that looks like, and provide treatment guidance for treatment technologies. So the big connection here, connecting the dots between your contaminants in your well water from your lab report that you punch into this application, and connecting it to the right treatment technologies. So we have on staff a treatment engineer who's been doing this for 25 years, Cindy Clevens. She's an amazing person to work with, and we developed a series of logic models for the recommended contaminants that we recommend all private well owners test for on a 3 to 5 year basis. And those logic models form the basis for looking at one contaminant or multiple contaminants at one or varying concentrations. So it looks at the suite of contaminants and considers or evaluates one or multiples at the same time to provide treatment recommendations. And then it provides a brief review of health and home impacts. One of the comments to us are you can't write 5-page narrative fact sheets on arsenic. People are not going to read them. People are telling us they're not going to read them. So just real quickly, New Hampshire, as I mentioned, is the arsenic state. We have a very high prevalence percentage of people that use private wells. It's 46%. works out to about just over 500,000 people. We do not have uniform testing or treatment requirements like many states. We have installation requirements, but once you're done with installing them by a licensed well driller, we're done with you. The water quality and treatment is not required. There are some towns that have some requirements, but it's pretty limited. And generally, New Hampshire has pretty clean and abundant groundwater with respect to anthropogenic contaminants. So just a note about the data, we're lucky to have some fairly talented folks in the USGS office in New Hampshire, in Concord, and at Dartmouth, who are responsible for the two things on this slide. On the right is a study published in 2012 that identifies the estimated probability of arsenic being at 1 part per billion, 5, and 10. So the darker state on the left is 1 part per billion, estimated again by data that they've mined from well drilling and public and private well water supplies and geology, basically geologic units. So it's pretty prevalent, and most of those darker areas on the slide are where most of the people live. Particularly in the southeastern corner of New Hampshire, which is the coast, is much more densely populated. And on the left is a chart from statistical analysis from the Toxic Metals Superfund Research Program from Dr. Mark Borsek, who basically has correlated the degree of arsenic in New Hampshire groundwater to the number of cases of cancer you can actually avoid if you were to drop or treat or remove arsenic from people consuming it. So if you went from 10 to 5 parts per billion, somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 cases of cancer could be avoided. These are lifetime sort of present people who are exposed reductions. So to sum up, there are obviously, as people have mentioned, pretty significant long-term medical, health impacts. And I don't need to go through them, but basically these are drivers for us for continuing to work on on arsenic mitigation, and we have a outreach program that I won't talk about, but we have. So the other contaminants that are built into this tool have to do with, this is the range, if you can read them, bacteria, copper, lead, nitrate, kind of a standard suite of things that we see on a fairly frequent basis. This is a graph showing you the frequency of occurrence from the data that we have at the state lab and in our public water supply databases. So you can see arsenic comes up about 1 in 5 wells. So in New Hampshire, almost 20% of the wells are ringing up as being over 10 parts per billion. So that's a pretty significant number of people, both private wells and at public water supplies, that are above the standard. Radon is pretty high in our state, as well as secondary contaminants like iron and manganese. So we do interventions, and part of our work with CDC was to do a series of interventions, and we developed a guide around doing that for local municipalities. And this is one that happened in Tuftonboro in 2012. So the range, obviously 20 is an average, but in that first column, it's arsenic. You could see it's almost touching 35% of the samples that were taken. I believe in this event it was around 200 samples. So that's a pretty high number for people to be, folks who are drinking water above 10 parts per billion. So treatment is a tough, complicated topic. I'm a do-it-yourselfer, but once I start cutting into pipes, it can go in any direction, and sometimes not good. So people call us. We field about 400 calls in our state every year. There's a group of us that field those calls, and people definitely struggle with a variety of treatment questions that we try to help them through. In the survey that Dartmouth did, they came back with a result of around 37 people who were surveyed really didn't know what to do once they got their water test results back from the lab. So Dartmouth also did a categorical and regression tree analysis, and this is just teasing out, don't worry about the chart, but just to give you a sense of teasing out those factors that are driving whether or not they are choosing the proper treatment or not. And so based on whether they talked to people, whether they didn't talk to somebody, whether they talked with a treatment company or not, they were resulting in different outcomes in terms of whether they were choosing the right treatment. So this information was good for us to know, certainly in terms of our outreach and moving forward in terms of trying to figure out how to get them to choose the right treatment. Certainly this tool is helping them, we think. So just real quickly running through the tool. So we spent a lot of time, which I won't bore you with, trying to fight over how the screens should look and what words would be on the screen and how to make this look like a lab report. We tried to actually, the default units are default units for most labs in milligrams per liter for the majority of the contaminants. These are all the recommended tests for in our literature, online that we tell people to test for. So they punch in their results. They can punch in as many, all of them, as they want to. They tell us what town they're coming from, and they hit submit. And those numbers are passed through a series of logic charts. This is one of them. This is for arsenic. So the blue boxes are representing numbers, basically, and greater than or less than. It's evaluating these numbers and then leading to different types of treatment for arsenic based on whether it's arsenic, and iron and manganese are also filtered through this particular chart. So, here's the user entry. It's above 10 parts per billion. It goes through. If they didn't give us a number, we had to really map this out pretty cleanly because we had to pass this to the programmer, and the programmer basically took this and wrote it in XML. So and it amazingly worked fairly seamlessly between us and the programming. So we wanted, besides the numbers, on a few of the contaminants, we wanted people to tell us, were they seeing staining? Do they have taste issues? So depending on what they entered, like if they entered salt, sodium chloride, we would ask them if they have any taste impact, or if they entered an arsenic value but they didn't enter an iron value, they would get a pop-up asking for whether they had iron tested as well, so we could look at the ratio between arsenic and iron, which affects treatment. And so then the outputs are really just the recommendations. So they're split into 3 parts. There's a summary of the results, which is really focused on the water quality results from the lab. A sort of a treatment train, which is a graphic, which was a tricky thing to develop. And then the third part is, again, just some narrative, kind of honing in on those finer points that we wanted to take out of our already published literature, but make it clear to them, this is what you need to pay attention to with respect to your health and home impacts. So this isn't you'll have to go online and check it out. None of these graphics kind of capture everything on the output, but the real keys, some of the key things are, we really wanted people to know when their water quality was bad. So red X versus green checks seem to cover that. We needed to really discriminate for them, which the lab reports don't. This is bad, this is good. And then compare the value they entered against the limit, which is the term we use in New Hampshire, unless it's an advisory, in the third column, and then a 1-sentence statement that captures what's going on with their water. It meets or it exceeds the drinking water standard, or it doesn't meet that standard. Or at the bottom, you'll see for nitrate. I don't know if you can read it, but on several of the more health, impactful contaminants where it would involve like a nitrate impact for blue baby syndrome or lead or arsenic, when it was above the standard, they would get a message saying, your water's not safe to drink. You need to do something about it. So it's in bold and kind of it stands out a bit. So. And lastly, on this slide, in the middle, there's a yellow exclamation point, and so we wanted to also tell them, well, what happens, if someone types in 9 parts per billion for arsenic, and we tell them their water's fine? Well, that really shouldn't be. We shouldn't be doing that. So we took half the MCL for a number of the more for all of them actually. And whenever they're above 50% of the MCL, they get a message saying, you meet the standard, but you're approaching the limit. So the treatment train looks something like this. It's a dynamic image, so everything in that gray area, these boxes pop up based on what they're trying to remove. So at the top it says recommended water treatment for arsenic, lead, stagnant, and manganese. So that's what was entered for this particular output. And so it's ordered in the sequence that you would expect it would be installed. So all whole house systems are going to be the first step. In between a point of use and whole house, you're going to have a neutralizer to deal with lead, and then the point of use for arsenic, either reverse osmosis and arsenic or arsenic adsorption. And so those, again, are technologies, and this gets into the question of whether we did not and will not promote a particular proprietary system. So we stuck with these are the type, and our literature is consistent. The terms are consistent with the literature we publish, so everything kind of dovetails. We don't recommend specific systems. And then the last part is the interpretation. So again, it gives us some interpretation about the results from the test, the treatment devices or options that were suggested, with a little more narrative that tends to talk about the NSF standards that we point out that are there for certain treatment systems like oxidizing filters, and then the health concerns. So we want to make sure that if there's a health or a home concern, mostly it's either home or health concerns, which we're extracting out of a much larger, usually larger fact sheet narrative, so they can get just what they need based on what they entered. So the site also has what we thought were pretty key links out. So once people get this report, and the report is portable, so you can click on it and create a PDF or print it, and the idea is they would take it to a certified treatment professional or somebody who's qualified. The qualified professional is the term we use, I think, and they could have that conversation. And so they start that conversation with the right technologies. And this avoids, any variability in the recommendations between people. They can call us, obviously, to confirm, but it's a good starting point for them to have a conversation with treatment professionals. So there aren't many certified treatment professionals from WQA, but there's a few in New Hampshire. We also point them to NSF because they have the products and the manufacturers are listed there, so they could, they could go there and say, I want a 3M, filtration device. And then we also point them to Extension, National Extension, which we found to be a very accessible, if people wanted to dive in a little bit more about the treatment devices and what they were for and how they functioned, and had a little more chemistry or just a little more background about the treatments, that seemed to be a really good fit. So we put that in, and there's a call line, so they can continue to call us if they need to do that, and we can help them further. We do not publish a list of vendors for treatment. We decided not to. So this is the front page. So we have had about 3,000 users over the last 17 months, and we think it's working pretty well. We allow them to opt into a survey, so they give us their email, and we follow up with an email back to them with a SurveyMonkey link saying, thanks for using the tool, how can we improve it? And what did you do once, basically what did you do once you use the tool? And so this question is, are you more or less likely to install a treatment system after using the Be Well Informed tool? And so the response has been about 60% have said, yes, I'm more likely to install. 33 said about the same, and a few said no, they're less likely. Not sure why. I got to follow up with another question on that one. So, and then the next question, another question we ask is, has the water treatment system you installed reduced the contaminants in your water to the desired levels? So just over 30% said yes, a few said no, and then a majority said they don't know. So basically they're not retesting after they install, or possibly. So that's probable, I guess, that they may have installed something and just they're not retesting afterwards, which I think is not uncommon. So we did get a merit award from EPA earlier this month, and I should mention EPA is a great regional partner, and the USGS was a great regional partner. Our public health laboratories, Lou Baronelli, great partner, and the design team who worked with me on this included Paul Suska, Kelsey Vaughn, Christine Bowman, and Cindy Clevens primarily. And so, and this is the slide I forgot I had. So these are our project partners. We continue to work with all of these partners on an ongoing basis, and that's it. Questions?
Cliff Trines again. I should know this, and I can't remember if you mentioned it, but the tool does have some, it is geared somewhat toward the state of New Hampshire. I noticed you had that one window up there where you select your town and all that. But as far as its utility nationwide, is there anything that we would need to qualify, or would this be equally useful to well owners anywhere?
I think the MCLs and the SMCLs are pretty consistent state to state, but the better solution, and that we've talked to EPA about, is they have an e-enterprise portal that is designed to exchange state data and resources, and they've already taken our code and uploaded it to the national portal. And my understanding is they will make the code available to states that are interested and help them set it up, so then it can be tweaked by your programming staff rather than redone, sort of recreating the wheel. So that, they have it running. We've QA'd their version of it, and I don't know how much support they will provide through the portal, but that's one way to sort of not, it's New Hampshire centric. It's got New Hampshire towns. It's got New Hampshire numbers, but that's coming soon if you're interested. And I know Massachusetts has already asked for copies of them.
Thanks.
Lisa Lehman from Wisconsin DNR. I'm just wondering about the one question that seemed to get at, are you more or less likely to install a treatment device? Is that necessarily, I don't know that that's necessarily the measure of success of your tool, if people maybe just assumed they needed treatment, but they learned more about their results and found that they didn't need treatment. Maybe it's a comment more than a question, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
No, it's a good point. I mean, the tool is, and I think of it, and it is generally going for connect the dots between the contaminants of concern and what you need to do to treat that water to reduce exposure. But if you're just trying to interpret your lab results, stop right there, and you don't need to think more about it. I assume the people that are answering that question are those that have installed some kind of treatment or not, but.
Pete Pippo, State of Rhode Island. I've got just a comment and a question about the way language was used. As far as when you're interpreting the results, being very careful about trying to figure out where you, or what your conversation about using the word exceeds the standard.
Yeah.
I frequently run into communication problems around when we say it meets or exceeds a standard.
Yeah, I knew you'd ask me this question.
People talk about that being really safe, great water, yay.
Yeah.
And so, even terms like below the standard, above the standard, when you're using these numbers.
Right.
And then the second is, I noticed that you had radon as the second most common contaminant identified in your drinking water, and the communication around that, because it's an inhalation hazard and not a drinking water hazard. How do you communicate about that?
So in the narrative, if you have over 2,000 picocuries, we will give you a narrative that basically that points out that inhalation risks are the greatest risk. And it kind of mirrors our fact sheet. And I have to say, I'll back up a little. We had a fair amount of pushback from the real estate industry on radon particularly, because there's 55% of the wells in New Hampshire are known to be above 2,000. So a lot of new houses with wells are going to have radon above 2,000. And they wanted us to be very clear about what the necessary steps are, when you should consult someone, when you should treat. And so basically our narrative and our tool reflects that kind of initial threshold to look at the air risk first, consult a qualified treatment professional or mitigation professional, and when you get to 10,000, our narrative changes to, you really need to start doing, looking more seriously at treatment of water, because you're now, one of the four, that you need to you have 25% coming from your water, perhaps. So.
And on the term exceeds?
Sorry?
The conversation that you had around the term exceeds?
Yeah, right, because exceeds can mean different things to different people. I think we went with that because we would have had to change so many other things at our website because I think that word is commonly used in our literature. But it's a good point that I think when you look at that page, the red X kind of stands out for people, and I think it clarifies, even if they have some ambiguity of whether that's saying it's above or it's exceeding. But it's a good point. We might relook at the language once I can get another bottle of Excedrin, to handle the migraines that are going to come my way.
Judy.
Hi, I'm Judy Manners, Tennessee Department of Health. We'd like to swipe your code and see your algorithm. Can we do that?
Absolutely, yeah. It's public code, and I haven't really delved too deeply with the EPA portal. They kind of came and took the code and ran it, and we tested it for them. And that's my understanding is it's running now and somewhere, and it should be available to states to download. So
Awesome.
If I can talk to you later about it, a contact.
So I think one thing is when we talk to private well owners, we in Tennessee also have to go with the EPA's MCL list for obvious reasons. So we would have to look cautiously at what that says in terms of advising. But I send people to your site all the time, as well as the Ohio Know Your Well tool. They're great. It helps us in terms of, we can't really recommend specifics, but since someone else has kind of given you a nice, concise list, and there's an algorithm and it's published and EPA is going to pick it up, we feel a little bit more confident about saying,
Right.
consider this type. And so thanks for doing that.
You're welcome. And can I just note that we were inspired by Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Colorado, who had kind of you could enter in numbers and get a response. So that was clearly, around and a good tools for their states.
Hi, I'm Celia Larsen from Department of Health in Vermont. I was just wondering if you have created some kind of process to update the tool when there's new technologies or MCLs are changing or that type
Well,
of...
it was written in XML, which is I'm not a programmer anymore, but you can. It's fairly easy for our maintenance, the OT people, the IT people to maintain this. So yeah, I mean the idea of adding like PFOA or something else would be possible for us. It's a resource issue.
But not so much like adding it to the code, but doing it, remembering having staff that keeps, and keeps an eye out for these things and actually...
Ownership.
Exactly.
Yeah, we own it.
Okay.
I mean, we own our bureau, our program own it, and I am responsible for keeping it going, so as long as I'm around, it'll...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just curious, you might have gone, this is Frida, Minnesota Department of Health. You may have gone over this, but is there a bridge for when people get their test results, a reminder to go to this website to enter the test results and understand?
I didn't mention that. So we worked with a lot of stakeholders from the New Hampshire Accredited Lab Association, well drillers, treatment companies. We've asked all of them to put it on their literature. So on our state lab report, there is a web link, and I think they send them electronically now, so they can click and go right to the tool. And we have MTB, we have programs internal to DES that have put it on postcards and things when they're going out to sites saying you have MTB, but you may want to test for arsenic and these other things as well, and it's on that as well. So we have it kind of multi-pronged throughout a bunch of different programs.
I have a couple comments. We have a pretest for our private well class, and we ask a question, basically ask people to convert from 100 ppb to milligrams per liter, because a lot of times test results aren't always in milligrams per liter, and only 27% of about 4,000 people have got that right.
Wow.
So the big advantage in my book for this tool is when you're putting in your constituents, you have a drop down that says milligrams per liter, micrograms per liter, ppb or ppm, so they can match it to what's on their lab report. Because that isn't in any other tool that I know of, and I haven't necessarily looked at all of them. And the other thing is it asks you what town you live in New Hampshire, and it's clearly geared to New Hampshire, but it also has a place where you can put anonymous. And so we share this in every webinar we do and tell people to go there and use it if they get a lab test, and then go to a public health professional, which is the other thing. No one should be interpreting the results from something online. And so they tell people to go to a health professional, which is what we all should be doing. So it's a step up, if you will, in my book. So,
Thanks.
all right,
Thank you.
Great, thank you.